Hello, so welcome back to our English language learning session. It's our lesson number two, and we have done a lesson number one in which we discussed about what is English language and what is the importance of English language and some basic overview. So today is lesson two, and today we will discuss about sentence structure and how are they formed and a few examples with them, and I'll let you know the difference between various types of sentence structure. So let's start with our lesson two. Let me quickly share the screen with you. Okay, so let's formally begin the lesson. As you can see, today we'll be discussing about sentence structure patterns and we'll try to cover it in 50 minutes in our lecture. So let's begin. So what is a sentence structure pattern? This is our main topic for today. So if you look at the basic definition of a sentence structure, so sentence structure refers to the arrangement of core elements in a clause. So important aspect over here is the core components of a structure, which are very basically the important aspect that you need to understand. So the main core elements are subject, which is S, V, which is the verb, O, which is the object, C, which is the complement. We will discuss further that there are two types of complement, and complement basically means that they're enhancing the meaning of a certain aspect. And then A, which is the adverbial. Adverbial are the adverbs that are enhancing the meaning of verb in the sentence. So English is primarily an SVO language. It means that the typically or the most used form of sentence pattern is the SVO structure. So what is SVO? If you look at this sentence I have written for you, so subject comes first, then the verb, and then object if required. So object is not a compulsory part of an SEO structure. There are some patterns that do not actually require the object, while there are some patterns that have object in it. So object is an optional element in the SVO structure in the sentence pattern parts. So if you look at a simple example I have just given, the dog bit the man and the man bit the dog. So it is a simple structure, which is an SVO structure. We have a subject, the dog, then we have bit, which is the verb, and then we have the object, which is the man. So same words, but different structure, and they are conveying the different meanings. So that is why our sentence structure is very important. One should know that what's the meaning they want to convey, and that is where you have to learn about the correct use of sentence structure. So as you can see in these examples, the first one is the dog bit the man, and the second is the man bit the dog. So since we only change the placement of subject and object, the first sentence actually means that the dog is biting the man. But in the second sentence, you could see that the man is actually biting the dog. So the meaning has completely changed just because we have changed the structure of the sentence. So here comes the importance of the sentence structure. So without wasting time, let's talk about the first type of sentence structure, which is the SV structure. So S means subject and V means verb. And as you can see, this sentence structure does not have object in it. And this is the most basic clause pattern. So what is a clause pattern? The clause pattern is something that has a verb in it, that has a subject in it, but that does not mean that they necessarily need an object. So the structure remains the S and V, where the verb actually is the intransitive verb. Now we have already discussed in parts of speech that what is an intransitive verb. Your verb can be transitive and can be intransitive. So intransitive verb means that they do not need an object. They does not take an object. Object is not a compulsory part for them. And that is why that verb is called the intransitive verb. So if you look at the examples, the first one is a very basic one, birds fly. So birds fly. In this sentence, I'll highlight the sentence structure with different colors. I'll be using the orange for the subject and I'll be using blue for the verb. So I have highlighted birds as subject, while if you see in this sentence, fly is the verb. And you can see there isn't any object, and there is actually no need of an object. The sentence is giving the full meaning, it is conveying the message, and you can see that the sentence is actually completed and there wasn't any need for it. So similarly, in the second sentence, the baby cried. Now, even in this sentence, you see the baby is actually the subject, while cried is actually your verb. And I have highlighted it again for you. Similarly, she smiled. Now, she is your subject, while smiled is basically the verb. The sun rises. Again, the sun is a subject and rises is your verb. Now, these were the easier examples. Let's move on to a slightly advanced level. The economy collapsed. In the structure, you can see the economy is the subject, while collapsed is your verb. So these type of sentences are very important in your documentations and your report writing, even in newspaper language. So the economy with the subject, slaps with the verb. The next is the patient recovered. So the patient is the subject, while recovered is the verb in the sentence. And similarly, the third part is the crowd dispersed. The crowd is the subject, while dispersed is the verb in the sentence. So, talking about a bit complex lexical level, the first one is that negotiations deteriorated. Now, in the sentence, the negotiations is actually the subject of the sentence, while deteriorated, singular verb, that is actually your verb of the sentence without any object, which is the intransitive verb. The next, the infrastructure decayed gradually. So the infrastructure is the subject, while delayed gradually is the verb. So you have actually noticed a very interesting pattern in this sentence. I will actually highlight that. You see, you had a verb which is delayed, but then you see another word that is gradually. So there is where we have our adverbial. As we discussed in the starting, we will have an adverbial in the sentence as well. So here is an example of adverbial. So what is adverbial? Adverbial is something that is actually enhancing the meaning of the verb, which is delayed, decayed. So how is it adding a meaning to it? So it is actually telling us how often is the decade happened. It is answering the question how often, that is why it is an adverb. I have also already mentioned it in the notes as well. The next sentence we have is the paradigm shifted dramatically. Again, the first part is your subject and shifted dramatically. Again, shifted is our verb, yes, and then dramatically. Again, we have an adverbial in this sentence. So adverbial, and then if we look at the what question it is answering, so you can see that it is answering how. Yes, it is answering how. So that answer is dramatically. So that the shift is actually dramatic. That is actually enhancing the meaning of the verbs in this sentence. So these are a bit complex sentence. I'll repeat it again for the structure. The infrastructure decayed gradually. So decayed was the verb, while gradually, which is adding more information about the verb, is gradually, which is an adverb in the sentence. And you can add adverb, but you cannot add the object. That's one thing that you have to keep in mind in the SV structure. You can keep on adding adverbs to the sentence, but you cannot add object to the sentence. And similar in the second example, paradigm shifted dramatically. So you have added dramatically as an adverb to the sentence, but you cannot add object to the sentence. So I have also write a key rule for this form of sentence, which is that if you ask what after the verb and there is a no answer, it is likely an SV structure. For example, she laughed, and the answer is she laughed what? Because there isn't any object in the sentence. You cannot find the answer to what in this sentence. So since you can't find the answer to what and the answer is no, so since the structure will be an SV structure. So I think you're clear about the first type of sentence structure. We will move on to the second one, which is the SVO structure. Very important and the most dominant structure in the English language is the SVO structure. Now the SVO structure is subject, verb, plus the direct object. Now here you have an object, which is the direct object. So your verb will become transitive because it is requiring an object. And the above you did not have an object, and that is why your verb was intransitive. So here your verb will automatically shift to transitive and you are having an object in the sentence. Let's look at the basic example. She reads book. Now she is again your subject while reads is your verb and books is the object in the sentence. So that's how you're gonna place a SVO structure. The next is Ali plays cricket. So Ali will be your subject while plays will be your verb and cricket again will be your object. I'm highlighting each part for you so that it is easier for you to understand. The next is they completed the task. Now they is the subject in the sentence. And then we have completed, which is the verb of the sentence. And then the last part is the task, which is the object of the sentence. Yes. So now in these examples, if you have to ask the question what, like I told you above that the SV structure does not answer the question to what, but the SVO structure does answer the question what. So if you ask the question like she reads or she read what? She reads what? She reads books. And Ali played what? So it was cricket. And what they completed? So it was the task. So all these questions in the SVO structure are going to be answering your question what. So this is a very basic hint and a trick to actually identify the SVO structure. Now moving on to a bit complicated sentence structure. The researcher conducted the experiment. Now the researcher is actually the subject, conducted is your verb, and the experiment is actually the object of the sentence. The next one is the manager, which is actually the subject of the sentence. And then we have approved, which is the verb of the sentence. And then we have the request, which is, of course, the object of the sentence. It is very important that you are able to identify each part of the sentence in your exam and even in your tests. So next part is the teacher explained the concepts. The teacher will be the subject, explained will be your verb, and the concept, this is going to be your object. So now move on to a bit advanced and academic level of the sentence structure. For example, the committee ratified the proposal. Yes, since the structure remains the same, no matter how difficult the English is or the vocabulary is, your sentence structure will be the same. So the committee is the subject, ratified is the verb, and the proposal will be the object of the sentence. And the next is the scientist refuted the hypothesis. So the scientist will be the subject, refuted will be your verb, and the hypothesis is actually going to be your object of the sentence. Yes. And then another example is the organization implemented the structural reforms. So the organization is going to be the subject of the sentence, then implemented is again going to be the verb of the sentence, and the structural reforms is again the object of the sentence. Similarly, the last one, I would like you to know to do it yourself, and then I'll tell it to you. Yes, the policy exacerbated economic inequality. Yes, the policy is the subject, exacerbated is the verb of the sentence, and economic inequality is actually the object of the sentence. Now, in exam, that you have to do a structural analysis of these sentences. Now, how will you do it? For example, you have the question, the government introduced new legislation. Now you have to write first the subject of the sentence. You write subject and write the subject that you find in the sentence, which is the government. The next you'll identify the verb of the sentence, which is introduce. You'll write it down. And the last you will identify the object of the sentence and then you'll write it down as well. So, and a very important structural note that I have written for you that you have to keep in mind is introduce the government new legislation. Now, that is not a correct structural form. Now, what's the problem in this? The sentence is starting with the verb, not with the subject. And there is the subject, the government. And then you have the object, which is the new legislation. So now you see the pattern is disturbed. So this won't be an SVO structure. You cannot change the placement of the subject or the verb or even the object. It is going to change the meaning, it is going to change the structural pattern of the sentence. So SVO means subject has to come first, then the verb, and then the object. You cannot mess with the structural form. Okay, let's move on to the third sentence structure type, which is the SVC structure, which means subject, verb, and complement. Now there's a new term called complement. Now, what is a complement? So SVC, which is often confused with SVO, which is subject, verb, and object, which we have discussed above, is when we add a complement to the sentence. Now the structure remains the same. You have subject, then you have verb, but in place of object, you have a complement. Now complement means that the subject, which is of the type of subject complement, because there are two types of complement. First, we are going to discuss subject complement. SVC is basically subject complement type. So if you have a subject, then you have a verb, which is the linking verb, and then you have the subject complement. Don't worry, I'll explain it to you how it is being formed. So subject, very easy to understand, same. And then the linking verb. Linking verbs, as we have discussed in the parts of speech, linking verbs are be, seem, appear, become, refrain, remain, feel, look. These are a few examples of linking verb, yes. And then you have a subject complement. So subject complement is actually a behavior, it's actually a feeling, it is actually a complement to your subject. It is adding more meaning to the subject. It is enhancing its qualities. It is adding their personality. It can be anything that is adding more meaning to your subject. So let's look at the example where she is happy. Now, this is a very good example and a very easy one. Now, she is the subject. Is your linking verb, and happy. Now you see, now you can understand what I meant by compliment. So compliment is something which is actually describing how she is feeling. It is not like a typical object. It has some connection with the subject, and that is why it is called subject complement. If your object does not have any connection with the subject, then you cannot call it a complement. Just because this word has an it has an association with the subject, that is why it is called a complement. Now look at the other example. He became tired. Now he is as usual your subject. Became is a linking verb. Now look at tired. You see, tired is not just an object. It is a feeling that is describing how he is at what stage right now. Since he is tired, so tired is actually adding more meaning to his condition. So that is why it is called a complement. Look at the other example. The sky looks blue. Now, the sky is a subject, looks is your linking verb, and blue is an attribute. Blue is not a typical object. It is adding more meaning. It is adding a more specification to the sky that the sky looks blue. And that is why it is known as a complement. Now, look at a more complex examples. The proposal seems practical. I'll color it again for you. The proposal is the subject, seems is the linking verb, and practical. Now look at practical. Practical is not just an object. Practical is describing how the proposal looks like. And that is why we'll call it a complement. Now look at it. The results appear promising. Now the results are subject. Appear is your linking verb. But promising. Now, promising is not just an object. It is actually describing how the results are. And again, that is why it is a complement. Yes. Again, look at the third example. The situation remains stable. Now, situation is a subject. Remains is your linking word. While stable is actually adding more meaning to the situation, that how the situation is, and that is why it is a complement. Now look at the advanced sentence structure forms. The first is the argument appears logically inconsistent. Now the argument is a subject, appears is your linking verb, and logically inconsistent. Now you can see that your complement is not just a single word, it is actually a compound word. Yes, your complement can be a whole sentence, your complement can be a single word, your complement can be more than four words, more than two words. So there's no limit to the amount of complement that you add. So in this sentence, you have two complements, which is logically inconsistent, which is a compound word. So it is adding more meaning to the argument, how the argument is. So the argument appears logically inconsistent. Look at the other example, the findings. The finding is the subject while remain is the verb. And the other part of the complement is empirically inconclusive. Again, a compound word and adding more meaning to your subject. The third is the strategy, which is the subject of the sentence, and then we have proved, which is the verb of the sentence, and then is counterproductive. Again, a compound verb adding complement to your subject. Now look at this, the key difference between SVO and SVC. As I told you before that one of a very confusing sentence structure is SVO and SVC because most of the students confuse the difference between the object and the complement. Now look at this example. She made dinner. Now look at dinner. Do you think dinner is adding any comprehension or any meaning or any attributes or any, personality trait of she? No, it is not. Dinner is a separate subject. It is a separate noun, it is a separate object, and it has nothing to do with your subject. And that is why dinner is an SVO structure. She made dinner is an SVO structure. It is not a complement, it is an object. Now look at the other example. She is a doctor. Now, doctor is something that is adding meaning to her. That is an attribute. That is something that is describing her, that she is a doctor. So, doctor is not an object, it is a complement. It is adding meaning to your subject, and that is why this becomes an SVC structure. So there is no hard and fast rule that a certain word cannot act as an object and cannot act as a complement. It is about the context of the sentence. You have to look at the sentence and see if it is adding any meaning to the subject, if it is adding any complement to the subject. If it is adding a complement, then it will be your SVC structure. And if it is not adding any information to the subject, it is not describing anything, then it is an SVO structure. Okay, let's move on. I hope that these three are clear and we move on to the next one, which is the SVOO. Now, SVOO has double object. Now, how come double object in one sentence? So, if you look at the structure, there's a subject, there's a verb, and then there are two objects. First is the indirect object and the other is a direct object. Now, there are two types of object. Which one is which is very important to identify. The first is the indirect object, which is the receiver of the action. And direct object is the name of the action, the thing that is being done. So if I'll explain this to you in simple words, first you'll have a subject, then you'll have a verb, then you'll have the indirect object, the receiver of the action that is done by the subject. And then you'll have the direct object, that is the name of the action that is done by the subject on the object. Yes, now look at the example. She gave me a gift. Now she is your subject, gave is your verb. Now other parts, me a gift. And now I will identify both with different colors. Me is your indirect subject object, and then you have gift, which is your direct object. Now how is that? He gave me a gift. The process of giving the gift is done on whom? Who is the receiver of the action? Me. Yes, and that is why that is the indirect object. And what is the thing that is given to me? The gift. Yes, and that is why gift is the direct object. Let's look at the other example. He sent her a message. Now, there are two objects in the sentence. First is me, and the other is, sorry, first is her, and the other is message. So, he has sent a message to her. Now, the message is being sent by him to whom? Who is the receiver of the action? Her. Yes, and that is why she will be the indirect object. And what is the thing that is sent by him? Yes, the message. And that is why the message will be the direct object. So look at the intermediate examples. The teacher assigned the students homework. Yes, now, the teacher assigning the students, the action is being performed on the students. That is why student will be the indirect object, while the name of the action that is done by the teacher is homework. So, homework will become the direct object. Now, look at the other sentence. The company offered the clients discount. Now, what is the company offering? The name of the action is discount. So, discount will be the direct object. But the offer is being made to whom? Yes, the offer is made to the clients. The clients are the one who is being offered. The action is done on the clients. And that is why the clients will be the indirect object. Now look at this. The board granted the CEO the expanded authority. Yes. Now look at this sentence. Now the board granted the authority. And the board is doing an action on whom? The CEO. And what is the name of the action? Expanded authority. So the expanded authority will be your direct object and the CEO will be your indirect object. Look at the other sentence. The foundation awarded the researcher substantial funding. Yes. Now, in this sentence, you see the foundation is doing an action on the researcher. So the researcher will be the indirect object. And what is the action that is done? What is the name of the action? That is funding. So sustainable funding will be the object, which is the direct object. Now look at the last sentence. I will like you to think on it and then I'll let you know what are the two objects. Yes, the government allocated the province additional resources. The government is the subject, allocated is the verb, the province is the indirect object, and additional resources the direct object. Now, structural test. Now, how will we use analysis the question? So, she gave me a gift. First, you will identify the subject, which is she. Then, you will identify the verb, which is gave. Then, you will identify the indirect object, which is me, the receiver of the action. And then, you will identify the direct object, which is gift. And then, the last one, SVOC, subject, verb, object complement. A very advanced, a very powerful sentence structure form is this. Now, similar to SVC structure, which is subject verb complement, in which there was subject complement. The complement was actually meaning and actually giving a meaning to the subject of the sentence. So, in this structure, the meaning will be given to the object. Yes, the object is the one that is being explained, that is being modified, that is being attributed in the complement. So the complement is basically describing the object. Look at the basic example. They elected him president. Now, they is the subject, elected is the verb, him is the object. Now look at it. President is actually you can say a profession or actually a new authority that is given to him. The meaning is actually given to him. The president is actually an attribute that is given to him. And that is why president will be the complement, the object complement. Look at the other sentence. She painted the wall blue. Now, she is a subject, painted is a verb, and the wall is the object. Now, look at the name of the paint that is done on the wall. That is actually the attribute that is given to the wall. That is the extra meaning that is given to the wall. And that is the color blue. And that is why it will be a complement. Look at the next example. She found the movie boring. Now, the feature of the movie was that it was boring. So, movie will be the object and boring will be the complement. Look at a bit complicated sentence. The jury declared him innocent. The jury is the subject, declare is the verb, and him is the object. Now you see, the innocent is an attribute that is about him. It is not about the subject. It is about the him in the sentence and that he is innocent. So that is why it is an object complement. Let's see the other. The board appointed her director. The board is a subject, appointed is the verb, and her is your object in the sentence. And what is the extra have profession that is added to her? That she is appointed as director, and that is a complement that is added to her, and that is why it will become your object complement. Look at the sentence. The news made him anxious. So it's an attribute that is added to him, that he becomes anxious, and that is why it will be your object complement. Look at the advanced level of sentence. The scandal rendered the policy ineffective. So now the scandal is the subject of the verb and render is the verb of the sentence, while the policy ineffective. Now policy is the object of the sentence. Now if you see that at the sentence, how is the policy? Since it's answering the question how it is ineffective, that is why it will be a complement. It's an object complement. Look at the second sentence. The experience left the participants traumatized. Now, look at yourself that the experience, which is a subject, left the participant traumatized. So, traumatizing is actually an attribute that was done on participants, and your participants is the object of the sentence. And that is why traumatized will be the object complement. Look at the last one. The committee deemed the proposal unfeasible. So, the proposal's attribute is that it is unfeasible, and that is why unfeasible is the object complement. Now, very important question is how we recognize the SVOC structure. Very important. So, if you remove the complement from the sentence feels incomplete or change its meaning. For example, they elected him president. This is a sentence which I told you over here. This is the sentence that we are talking about. I'll highlight it for you. They elected him president. So look at the sentence. They elected him, and you have removed the word president. And now you will ask the question what? They elected him what? And the answer is incomplete. You do not know the answer to the question. So that is why it indicates that your SVOC structure is incomplete. It is not an SVOC structure. They elected him becomes SVO structure, subject, verb, object structure. It does not have a complement. So when you have to identify if the sentence have complement in the sentence, you have to ask the question what. And if you get the answer to this question, then there is a complement in the sentence. For example, they elected him president. So president is actually the complement to the object. So yeah, this was it from today's lecture, and I hope that you have an understanding of all the basic structure that we did today. I'll give you a quick recap. We did subject verb structure first, which is subject and verb. Very simple, two word. We have a subject followed by a verb, which is intransitive. Then we discussed SVO structure. We have subject, we have verb, and we have object. There, verb is followed by an object, so it becomes transitive verb. Then we have the SVC structure. Here the complement means subject complement, and that is adding more meaning to the subject, and the verb is the linking verb. That becomes SVOO subject, which is double object. We have subject, we have verb, and then we have two objects. First is the indirect object, which is the receiver of the action, and the other is the direct object, which is the main thing, the name of the thing that is being done. And then we have the SVOC structure, which is subject, verb, object, and object complement. We have the subject, which is followed by verb, which is followed by object, and then we have an attribute about the object, which is the object complement. So yeah, this is it from today. I hope that you are able to learn something, and now we will move on to our lesson in the next video. Up till then, take care, Allah Hafiz.